I'd like you to imagine that you and I are at work and we get a call from somebody in engineering. And they say, hey, you know what? We'd love to have our own website and we like to manage it and be administrators for that website. Can you do it? And the cool thing is we could look at each other, and then if we get the appropriate permissions regarding giving them that access, we could absolutely set that up. And an easy way to do that would be to create a separate subsite just for engineering. And then as part of that subsite, we could set up the privileges and rights for individual users and administrators for that site. And in this nugget, we're going to take a look at exactly how we go about creating subsites in a SharePoint environment. So let's begin with the age-old question of why. Why would we want to create a subsite? We have a top-level site for Acme Inc. And we know we can create multiple pages for a site. In our previous nugget, we created a second page for the Acme Inc. website. And so if we have an organization such as HR, we could just create a page or pages for HR, or we could have HR be its own separate sub-site in our site collection. And as far as why to do it that way, one reason would be administration. If we want to have one person or one group of people be responsible for the maintenance and management and the upkeep for the HR site, by creating its own separate sub-site and giving the rights to the entire sub-site to that administrator, it simplifies the administration of the HR portion, if you will, for our SharePoint web services. So in our example, let me go ahead and put a little tree here. Let's go ahead and say we have an HR department and we have a sales department. In fact, let me do that in red to keep it consistent. Sales. And let's imagine that we also have engineering. Once again, from an administrative purpose, if we had separate groups that were managing each of these sites, by having them as each separate subsites, it makes the administration setup a lot more clean than if we did separate pages for those departments. And previously in this course, when we created the top-level site, we had the option of using a template, and we have that same option here when we create subsites. And the benefit for you and I of using a template is that it puts certain things in place. For example, if we wanted to have a news feed and a document library as part of a new site, instead of having to manually bring those elements in, we can use a template that already has those, and we've got a head start in the creation and working with that new site. And then before we jump into the demo, let's take a look at URL choices. If we are going to create a subsite just for HR, if the main URL is http://srv1.nuglab.com, I wrote local initially, but in this lab it's a .com. When a user goes to that, with HTTP, the default port is 80. The browser adds that by default. And they would end up at the root site. So what we need to decide is, what do we want the URL to be to reach HR? So as part of the creation of this subsite, we could add on a subsite URL identifier. And for HR, perhaps we use the letters HR. So a user going to serve1.nuglab.com/HR would connect to the HR subsite. And for sales, we could use a /sales. And for engineering, we could use a /engineering. Or ENG for short, whatever we decide to use. And then we would communicate that to our users or provide hyperlinks with those URLs in them. So a user, all they have to do is click on a link, takes them to that site or that subsite, so they can start to work with the services of SharePoint. So let's finish this nugget by demonstrating the creation of these three subsites. And I'd also, after you watch this in the nugget, I'd also like you to practice hands-on in the labs that we're providing for you. And to get to the labs, you'd log on with your CBT Nuggets account. And then over on the right, you can click the link for the lab that corresponds to this video. So you can practice exactly what you're seeing me do in this nugget. As a reminder of our devices in the topology, we have two. We've got a server over here called srv1.nuglab.com. Its IP address in this lab environment is 192.168.1. And I'll put an X here. And the SharePoint server is .216. X marks the spot. And this Windows 10 client that we're sitting at right here, it's on the same network, and it's at .210. Again, with the .210 replacing that last octet of the IP address. So at this computer right here, we'll log on as Bob. The lab password is nugget !23. And then we can open up a browser to connect over to the SharePoint server, either by its IP address or by name, because we do have name resolution set up in this environment in the lab. And we'll log on as administrator, and then we'll create the three subsites, one for HR, one for sales, and one for engineering. So we'll put the password in for Bob and press enter. Then I get a little pop-up regarding networks, and I'm simply going to click on the desktop, and then let's launch Chrome to go ahead and use Chrome to connect over to the SharePoint server. So we'll launch Chrome from the taskbar. And here in Chrome, let's go to srv1.nuglab.com. And then I'm going to go ahead and make sure I take off that :6783. That's the administrative port that's set up on the SharePoint system for central administration. We're going to connect as the user administrator to create our new subsites. So as serv1.nuglab.com selected, we'll press enter. So here we are at the Acme Inc. root site. Now to create a brand new subsite in this site collection, the way to do it is to go to the gear up here, click on the gear, and from the drop down, we're going to select Site Contents. And once we select Site Contents, not only does it show us the site contents right here, but if we scroll down a little bit, it also gives us the option for creating a new subsite. So let's scroll down. Here's the option for creating a new subsite, so we'll simply click on it. So let's create a new subsite for HR, and for the description we'll say, in fact, let's go back up and say HR subsite for training purposes. So when we see it, we'll know exactly what it is. And for the description, we'll say HR subsite description. Now under the website address right here, let's go ahead and specify that it'll be srv1.nuglab.com/ and let's go ahead and use HR for the actual URL. So that way when a user connects and they go to that /HR as part of the URL, SharePoint will know, oh, I should connect them to the subsite for human resources. And then if we scroll down a little bit further, we have the options regarding our template, which template we want to use. Do you want to use a blog template or a project site template? And for example, a project site template's automatically going to have things like a task list and a calendar already there that we can use instead of having to bring them in, or a community site. And it's very likely that the most common template that's used is the team site template. So with that selected, we'll go ahead and scroll down a little bit further. And here it's asking us about permissions. Do you want to have the same permissions as the parent site, or do you want to have unique permissions just for this site? So those would refer to permissions as far as who can access the site, what they can do on that site, and so forth. So for now, let's go ahead and inherit the permissions from the parent site, but we could go back later to this HR subsite and we could change that if we wanted to. Also, if we scroll down a little bit further, because this is a subsite, we can control the quick launch bar that's over here on the left. And the question is, do we want to have this subsite for HR show up on the quick launch bar for the parent site? In this case, the parent is our top level root site for Acme. So if we want a hyperlink for this subsite in the quick launch bar on the parent page, we'll simply make sure that radio button is selected for yes. It's also asking us if we want this site in the top navigation area as well, and that one is yes by default. So we'll leave that yes. And the third question here is navigation inheritance. The question is, do we want to use that top navigation bar from the parent on this subsite? And if we do, we simply click that radio button for yes there as well. So let's say yes to all three of those for this HR subsite, and we'll click on create. So now we're looking at the HR subsite right here. And if we want to go back to the top level site, we can use this hyperlink in the top navigation bar for Acme Inc. root site, and it'll take us there. Now, we need to repeat this process 2 more times. We want to create a subsite for sales and a subsite for engineering. And I've got a question for you. Do you recall where we would go to start the process for creating a new subsite? Where do we start? And if you said, Keith, we'd go to the gear icon, you'd be spot on. Good job. So we'll click on the gear. And from this top level site with the gear icon selected, we'll go down to Site Contents. And then in Site Contents, we'll scroll down a little bit. And here's the option to create a new subsite. Also worth noting is that right here, it's also listing our existing subsites that are already as part of this site collection. So we'll click on the new subsite once again right here in the lower left to create a new subsite for sales. We'll call it Sales Subsite. And we'll give it a description. And then for the URL, let's go ahead and just use the URL of sales off the parent. And we'll use the team site template as well for this. We'll scroll down. We'll use the same permissions as the parent site. And we'll put a yes for all the options regarding navigation, including inheritance. And then we'll go all the way to the bottom and we'll click on create. And then we'll repeat that process once more for engineering. So going back to our top level site, we'll go to the gear. From the drop down, we'll go to Site Contents. We'll scroll down. We'll click on New Subsite from near the bottom. And we'll call this one ENG Subsite. And we'll give it a description as well. And for the description, we'll say Engineering Subsite as part of the Acme Incorporated Site Collection. And then for the URL name, let's go ahead and use ENG. And once again, let's use the team site for the template. And we'll scroll down. We'll use the same permissions. We'll inherit all the navigation, and we'll click on Create to create this third subsite. So now if we go back to the top level site, now all of these pages are looking pretty similar because we haven't really done a lot of customization to the home page for any of these sites. But have no fear, we will get there. So in this nugget, we created 3 subsites, one for HR, one for sales, and one for engineering. To do that, we went to the top level site, we went to the gear, we went to site contents, and then from the bottom left, there was an option to create a new site. We chose the template we wanted to use, we selected the navigation options we chose, and we clicked on Create. And just for grins, let's go ahead and open up a new browser, or a new tab anyway, and let's go to srv1.nuglab.com, and let's do a slash, let's go to sales, S-A-L-E-S, and press enter. I just want to verify that it takes us to the correct subsite homepage, which it did. So we went to serve1.nuglab.com/sales, and it took us directly to the sales subsite, which is what we're looking at right here. So now that you've seen the creation of 3 subsites in a SharePoint system, and I'd like you to practice what we've learned in this nugget to reinforce that learning and create 3 subsites just as we've done in this nugget. So enjoy the time with the hands-on practice. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.